Before kingdoms rose and borders were drawn, this land held stories buried beneath layers of dust and silence. Long before Israel had a name, this region was a crossroad of empires, migration, and forgotten civilizations. Archaeologists uncover fragments of a world where early humans built the first settlements thousands of years ago. These early communities lived between survival and mystery, leaving behind clues that still puzzle historians today. The land known as Canaan became a stage for shifting powers, where cultures collided and identities began to form. Religious beliefs emerged early, shaping not only identity but destiny in ways that would echo for millennia. Whispers of a single God began to rise among many voices, marking a turning point in human belief. Tradition speaks of a man named Abraham, whose journey would alter the course of history forever. His migration was not just movement, it was the beginning of a covenant, a promise tied to land and legacy. Generations followed, carrying stories passed through memory, shaping identity long before written records existed. But survival in this land was never simple. Conflict and scarcity shaped every chapter of early existence. Famine forced migration, pushing entire groups toward Egypt in search of survival and stability. In Egypt, these migrants became something else, not just outsiders, but eventually subjects under power. What began as refuge slowly transformed into oppression, setting the stage for one of history's greatest escapes. And from that darkness, a story would emerge, one of liberation, faith, and a journey back to a promised land. From the shadows of oppression in Egypt, a quiet resistance began to form, one that would soon shake an empire. Among them rose a figure shaped by two worlds, carrying both privilege and hidden identity: Moses. His story begins in secrecy, saved from death and raised within the very power he would one day confront. Years later, a single moment of violence would force him into exile, pushing him into the wilderness. It was there, in isolation, that something extraordinary happened, an encounter that would change everything. A voice spoke, not of power, but of purpose, calling him to lead his people to freedom. Returned to Egypt, he stood before Pharaoh, demanding what seemed impossible: the release of an entire people. What followed were events that blurred the line between history and legend, plagues that shook the land. Each sign was a message, each moment building pressure until resistance finally broke. In the dead of night, the command was given: leave everything behind and begin the journey. Thousands moved together into uncertainty, stepping into a future defined only by faith and survival. But freedom was not immediate. Egypt pursued them, turning escape into a desperate race against time. Trapped between an army and the sea, the moment seemed like the end of their journey. Then, in a moment that would echo through history, the impossible appeared to unfold before them. They crossed not just a sea, but a threshold, from slavery into identity, from fear into destiny. Freedom did not bring peace. It brought uncertainty, as the wilderness tested both survival and belief. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into years, as the journey stretched far beyond expectation. Without structure, fear began to grow, questions rising about leadership, purpose, and the unknown future. But in the silence of the mountains, something monumental was about to be revealed. At Mount Sinai, the story shifts from survival to law, from movement to identity. Here, a covenant was forged, not just between people, but between humanity and something greater. The laws given would define morality, justice, and the framework of an entire society. But even as laws were formed, doubt crept back into the hearts of the people. In moments of fear, they turned away, revealing how fragile belief can become under pressure. Consequences followed, reminding them that freedom also carried responsibility and accountability. Yet despite failures, the journey continued, guided by something unseen but deeply felt. Food appeared where none should exist, reinforcing belief in a force beyond human control. Water flowed from stone, turning impossibility into survival in the harshest conditions. A generation passed in the wilderness, shaped by struggle, discipline, and transformation. And as the horizon finally changed, a new identity emerged, not just survivors, but a people. After years of wandering, the people stood at the edge of promise, ready to claim a land long imagined. But entering the land was not peaceful. It was marked by conflict, resistance, and survival through conquest. Tribes settled across the land, forming a loose alliance bound by shared history, but not yet unity. Without a central ruler, leadership fell to judges, figures who rose in times of crisis and faded in peace. But instability grew, and the people demanded something new, a king to unify and protect them. The first king rose with promise, but power proved fragile under pressure and expectation. Then came David, a warrior, a poet, and a leader whose story would echo across generations. From shepherd to king, his rise symbolized the possibility of unity and strength through belief. Under his rule, Jerusalem became more than a city. It became the heart of identity and power. His legacy passed to Solomon, whose reign brought wealth, wisdom, and unprecedented construction. The temple rose in Jerusalem, a symbol of devotion, unity, and connection to the divine. But prosperity carried a hidden cost. Division began to grow beneath the surface of success. After Solomon, the kingdom fractured north and south, united no longer. Rivalries deepened, weakening both kingdoms and leaving them exposed to greater powers rising nearby. What had once been a unified vision was now fragile, on the edge of collapse and conquest. The cracks within the divided kingdoms became fractures, and those fractures invited powerful empires to strike. From the north, the Assyrian Empire advanced, relentless, strategic, and known for its brutal conquests. The northern kingdom fell first, its cities destroyed, its people scattered into exile. Entire populations were displaced, their identities fading into the vast machinery of empire. The southern kingdom survived for a time, but the storm was far from over. Then came Babylon, rising with even greater power, setting its sights on Jerusalem itself. The siege was relentless, cutting off supplies, hope, and any chance of escape. And then, the unthinkable, the city fell, and the temple, once the center of identity, was destroyed. Jerusalem was reduced to ruin, and its people forced into exile far from their homeland. In Babylon, they faced a new reality, living among strangers, holding on to memory as their only anchor. Without land, without temple, identity had to evolve, from place to belief, from structure to tradition. Stories were preserved, laws were remembered, and culture adapted in the face of displacement. Then, a shift in power changed everything. Babylon fell to a new empire rising from the east. Under Persian rule, something unexpected happened. A decree allowing exiles to return home. And so began the return not just to a land, but to the rebuilding of identity from the ashes. The return of the land was not an ending, but the beginning of a fragile and uncertain new chapter. The temple was rebuilt, but it stood in a world now dominated by powerful and shifting empires. Persian rule gave way to Greek conquest, as Alexander's empire swept across the known world. With Greek influence came cultural pressure, language, philosophy, and identity began to shift. Not all accepted this change, and resistance began to rise from within the population itself. The Maccabean revolt ignited, a fight not just for land, but for identity and belief. Against overwhelming odds, they reclaimed Jerusalem and rededicated the temple. But independence was brief, as a new empire rose, one more powerful than any before it. Rome took control, imposing order, taxation, and a heavy presence across the land. Tension grew once again, as resistance simmered beneath the surface of occupation. The first Jewish revolt erupted, turning frustration into open rebellion against Rome. Rome responded with overwhelming force, determined to crush the uprising completely. In 70 CE, Jerusalem fell once more, and the Second Temple was destroyed in flames. Survivors scattered across distant lands, beginning a diaspora that would span continents and centuries. Yet even in exile, the story did not end, because identity once forged cannot easily be erased.